Eloheinu nidgelu. Yimali Adonai kol mishalesecha. Ata yadaiti Yeshia Adonai Mashiach. Ya'anehu mishmei kodshem. Bigures Yesha Yeminim. Eile barechev ve'eile basusim. V'anachnu b'shem Adonai Eloheinu nazgir. Hema korov nafolu. V'anachnu kamru v'naseidim. Adonai Heshia Hamelech Yaneinu v'yem karem. So we're pretty much by the end of the Maimer. That's on page 160. And we said yesterday that what we're seeing in this Maimer is sort of three sets of the spheres or the kaiches in the nefesh, how one includes the other, which means going down the line of chesed shebechesed, gvura shebechesed, tiferet shebechesed. But first he explains it how it is with the nefesh activis, the natural soul, and he explains it not in a way that it's emotions towards godliness, and not in a way that it's emotions towards evil, but it's just emotions towards worldly, natural, materialistic things. Nefesh Bahamas, Paru. He also explains it the way it is from the end of the Nefesh Elokis. Love for Hashem is Chesed, and then Chesed Sheba Chesed, how that love for Hashem manifests in everything, and so on. And then the third thing is he explains sort of the Yetzer Hara, that it's how the Nefesh Elokis, Nefesh Bahamas, is not just a Nefesh Bahamas, but it is invested in evil and things that are mamish bad and Heipach HaTorah or Dezorah and all sorts of things like that. But in each one, basically the principle is the same principle. Whatever chesed is, when you say love, it doesn't matter to what. It's a certain emotion. So can be love to Hashem, can be love to something materialistic, can be love to something which is totally evil. And the same with the others. So when we say chesed sheba chesed, gvura sheba chesed, tiferet sheba chesed, it doesn't really matter which of the three it is. The principle is the same principle. Let's just step back a few lines so we finish. Page 160. In the Maimer of Usefartem Lachem, which is in the book which is called Hasidic Discourses of the Frierdiker Rebbe, or you can see it in Yiddish, Mamar Yiddish, Usefartem Lachem. So we're up to the line that begins with the word Zehu. This is 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs from the top. Zehu Usefartem Lachem. I'm reading from the Hebrew. Zehu Usefartem Lachem. It means Asu es alachem shalachem tahor bar. Sphira means to be shining, should be clear. Your lachem should be clear. So now he's going back to answering the questions in the beginning of the month. And one of the main questions was, and elaborated on this, why lachem? Bashmina Tzeres, we know why it says lachem. By Sukkot, we also know why it says lachem. But why does it say lachem here? What does the lachem imply? And there's the answer that the avodah of Smiras Eimer is to refine and to make the lachem shine. Lachem means my personal Nefesh Bahamas and my Nefesh Bahamas attributes. Halachem ani shel Yehudi, the true lachem, the true essence of a year is really the midas of Gedusha. And I have to see that those midas should be shining. And then when it says Omer, which basically that's a measurement of grain, that represents midas hativius. These are the natural midas. And the avodah is to lift it. A mitzvah hu l'reim midas ativis, to raise and lift the midas ativis. By the way, the same is similar. Good morning with the tilas yadayim. When you wash your hands in the morning, when you wash your hands for bread, what do? We wash our hands, and after you wash, you're supposed to lift them. So, what Chassidus explains is actually in our curriculum, one of the Maimorim we do is a Maimor that explains the Tilas Yodayim of Chassidus. And what does it explain? The Yodayim, the hands, represent the Midas. Because it says in the Zohar, the right hand is Chesed, and the left hand is Gevura. And we know that Chesed and Gevura are the main Midas. So the hands represent the Midas. Water always represents Chokhmah. Torah is compared to water. So water is Chokhmah, wisdom, intellect. And what does it mean that we need to pour the water on our hands? That our Midas should be guided by our Seichel. And that Chas V'Shalom be just random Midas, whatever I feel, and unrestricted Midas. So we wash our hands by pouring water on the hands, and then we lift our hands, meaning that the purpose is to lift our midas, that the midas should become more refined. So the same thing here with the Omer, being that it represents the natural midas, so we lift it, indicating that we are refining it, we're lifting it to a higher level. And then it says, one of the questions, why is everything in multiples of three? Shloisha Noshim, Shloisha Megalim, Maglim, Shloisha Soyim, Shloisha Salim. There are three people doing it, and they have to have three instruments of the sickle in their hand, and it has to be measurements of 3 saw. It has to be done in 3 separate baskets. This all shows that it's about midas, and midas are primarily represented by the number 3, because midas is Chesed, Gevura, and Tiferes. Another thing he brought down before that, when they do the Eimer, we also saw this in the Rambam, the Eimer itself is supposed to be lach, it's supposed to be damp and fresh and damp. On the other hand, you are supposed to dry it up with fire. You put fire next to it, it should dry up. So the lach represents chesed, because that's mayim, and the dry up represents fire, which is gevura. In other words, it's all about chesed and gevura. We still have to figure out what's the connection to the human midas rachamim. He does say that the 13 sifting has to do with the 13 midas rachamim, but of course, 13 midas rachamim stand out that it's Hashem's attributes of forgiveness and compassion, but unconditional, no matter what. Even in the Chet Ego, which was the worst sin committed ever in history, when Moshe Rabbeinu pronounced the 13 attributes of mercy, it brought Hashem's forgiveness. But how does that fit in here? We have to still do a little research. We nether. I'll try to remember to do that. Then he said, why does it say Mochas HaShabbos? That was another question. Being that it's Yontif, it should just say Mochas HaPesach or Mochas HaYontif. Why Mochas HaShabbos? It doesn't always come out on Shabbos. And the answer is it doesn't mean Shabbos as the day of, which is halachically Shabbos. It means the idea of Shabbos, which is Shvisim Anochas Ha'olam, to let go of the worldly perspectives, the worldly value system, which is something which interferes with the person recognizing things from a godly perspective. There was a story that I think had come up earlier in the year. It's a little bit different, but the principle, again, is the same principle. It was a story with the Rebbe Rashab that he was traveling and it was Purim time. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said that the community where he was very fortunate that the Rebbe is spending Purim with them. And they asked the Rebbe Rashab if he would farbrein. And the Rebbe Rashab said no. Obviously, he wasn't up to it for whatever reason. The Frierdiker Rebbe was the principal of the yeshiva Temchet Tmimim. And the yeshiva Temchet Tmimim, the Rebbe Rashab looked at that as the sort of the crown jewel of all his achievements. It was very precious to him. Every student very precious. he showed interest in knowing and getting a report on every single student, how they're progressing. So the Frierdiker Rebbe, while he was there at that day, he got a telegram from Lubavitch. The telegram was from whoever was in charge, involved in the yeshiva, and the telegram was a report about the Bochum. Obviously, every once in a while they had to give a report, and it just happened to come that day. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said the report was a very good, positive report, and he knew that this would give his father tremendous pleasure. So he went in on the very same day, and he read the report to his father, and he saw that his father was very pleased. So he saw that he's in a up sort of presence of mind. He's in an up state of mind, upbeat, if you want to use that word. So he said to the Rebbe, maybe you'll bring. And here he answered yes. Obviously, he was so happy. Like it says, Simcha Perez Geda. There was a reason why he didn't want to bring. But once he became the Simcha from the report, it broke the whatever was sort of restricting, and he was able to go beyond that and say that he's Farbrengen. That Farbrengen, the Frierdiker was a very unusual Farbrengen. His father said a lot of L'chaim, the people there said a lot of L'chaim. And at one point, the Rebbe Rashab said, who wants to go on my wagon? And then he described the wagon. He said, the wagon is decorated with the most deepest, brilliant concepts of Chassidus. What does the Rebbe say? He gives over Chassidus. So it's decorated with the beautiful concepts of Chassidus. It's saturated with the tears and sweat of Avodah Chassidus. Okay, now who wants to go on the wagon? So one of the Chassidim began to cry and said, Rebbe, where are the steps to your wagon? So he said, you're right. You can't get into the wagon without steps. And he said, there are 4 steps. 2 steps to get off the ground, and 2 steps to get into the wagon. In other words, if I'm on the ground and I want to get into the wagon, it can't just go in. The wagon is higher up, the ground is lower. So I have to first get off the ground and then go into the wagon. It's like saying, first we had to go out of Mitzrayim, and then we can go into Shavuos and receive the Torah. So what he's saying is, in order to refine the Nefesh Bahamis, first we have to let go of our pre-existing way of looking at things, pre-existing value systems. Let go of the worldly way of seeing things, because we know that the worldly way of seeing things is not the Torah way. And we're not talking about things that are prohibitive, just talking about a certain way of perceiving things, what's valuable, what's not valuable, what's beautiful, what's not beautiful. There are different ways of looking at things. And therefore, that's why it says, Mochra Shabbos, after you rest, meaning after you let go of those worldly perspectives and values, then you can start working on refining your Nefesh Bahamis. The last paragraph, Kasha Yehudi, Misyagei L'Sakin and Sheva Shabbosin Sashaloi. So when a Yid works hard to refine and to correct those the 7 weeks, which are the 7 midas, Amidah Shal Nefesh Shal Kis, Yevarus Sheva Midas She'etz Hora. So we have basically the 3 sets. So what are we doing with the 7 midas of Nefesh Shal Kis? They're already in a good place. So it means the 7 midas of the godly soul, they refine the 7 midas of the Nefesh Bahamis. And through that, we're able to also transform the 7 midas of the Yetzer Hara. You have all 3 here. Yivar Sheva midas Yetzer Hara, Yizachu Sheva midas Ativius. So the 7 midas of Yetzer Hara, they have to be completely changed. And the 7 midas of the Nefesh Bahamis, which is not necessarily bad or evil, is just materialistic, has to be refined and elevated. As I usually have to talk about Doris Min Shemayim, Tmimis to Yena. Torah says should be 7. The question was, why does it say it should be complete? It just should say you have to count 7 weeks. We know that it means it's 7 weeks. So the answer is that when you do this, the Torah promises you, Tmimis to Yena, this will perfect you, this will make you complete. Let's do the Kitzer, and then we'll look a little bit more into this Maimer. Mevar Shalachem Shal Yehudi, the real Lachem, the real you in a Yid, is Seichel and Midas Alakim, the godly intellect and the godly emotion. In other words, the Seichel in me, which is into Hashem and understanding Hashem and understands things the way Hashem understands it, Hashem's way of thinking and Hashem's value system. And the midas are midas which are also godly midas. So I'm motivated and feeling love and fear, and all these midas are all related to Hashem. Shal Yodem Hu Usefartem. What is the Usefartem? Lasis is a lachem bar. I make the lachem to be clear and to be shining, meaning my never shabbat. Chesed is ava, love. Chesed Sheva Chesed is ava v'chol nafshecha, when the love manifests in everything. Gvura Shebechesed is listening kofrim v'apikurim. Gvura Shebechesed is to reject those that are heretics and those that deny Hashem and Torah and are fighting it. Tiferet Shebechesed is the avodah, to see the beauty in serving Hashem and avodas Hashem. Netzach Shebechesed is victory, to be able to defeat the Shabbamas, the Yitzhahara that are trying to block me from progressing in my connection to Hashem. Hoyt Shebechesed is the Siyatzav K'neged Hashpos HaKofrim, to stand up against those that are opposing, and I guess to hold back, not to be concerned about what I'm risking by doing that. Yisoid Shebechesed is the Kashrus. Yisoid is the bond between the Mashpia and the Makabel. And here, in this case, there's the bond between the Nefesh and Torah and mitzvahs. And Malchus Shebechesed is to actually bring it out in actuality, which is either through speech or action. Here he speaks about speech, Laharbez Ba'osis HaTorah, to speak words of Torah. And that's when the Chesed, my love for Hashem, comes out in the most revealed way. On the first page of this booklet, we had a list of different terms that are related to the Maimer. Almost all of them we went through now, but there's one part which we didn't have in the Maimer, but we have it in other Maimer. I'd like to explain it. So first of all, if you look at the page, I think now you see the connection to Sfira Seimer. The first thing is, well, we didn't have this in the Maimer either. It says, Usefartem Lachem v'sofra lo. What does that mean? We'll learn about this more when we come to Shavuos. But if you look in the booklet on page page 19. And basically we're explaining someone who doesn't study Chassidus, they really, they're mitzvahs to count, and that's it. We're explaining that Usefartem Lachem means it's a mitzvah to refine myself, and by refining myself, I'm preparing myself to receive the Torah on Shavuos. So the Zohar says that, as we know, Shavuos is the marriage between Hashem and the Yidden. Hashem is the Chassan, the Yidden are the Kala, and the wedding date is Shavuos, which basically means that's the day that we're going to establish our bond. So the Zohar says, just like by husband and wife, what does it say? This is page 19, that a woman has to count 7 days, v'sofra lo shivas yomim, v'achatitar. After 7 days, then she becomes pure, and then she could be with her husband. So the Yidden also had to count 7 weeks in order to be able to connect to Hashem. So clearly the 7 weeks of counting is 7 weeks of spiritual refinement and purification so that we could be together with Hashem. That's the words of Usefartem. Number 2, Sa'orim. One of the questions were, why is it barley? And the reason why this is a question is because all other korbanos that we brought a carbon from grain was always wheat. And only this carbon, there's one other carbon, but this carbon is the one that is barley. So based on this Maimer, the whole purpose of Sfira Seimer and the counting of the Omer And the whole purpose of this carbon was we're starting a process of refining the Nefesh Bahamas. Therefore, the carbons from Sa'irim, which is food for Nefesh Bahamas, for Behema. Where's the other carbon that is also such a thing? So the other carbon is by Saita. On the list, it's number 12. Saita is a woman that acts in a immodest way, and her husband says to her that he's sort of warning her that she shouldn't spend time with this and this person, because he knew that she and that person have a relationship which is not a very kosher one. And then she ends up being with him. No one saw that they committed a sin, but they were in a private place, which lends itself to suspect that they actually committed a sin. And then the Torah says that she has to go to the Beis Hamikdash, and she has to drink certain water, and that's going to prove whether she's innocent or guilty. If she's guilty, they have to get divorced because she committed adultery. They can't be married to each other. If she's innocent and his accusation was a false accusation, then they could be together with each other. And because she went through this in vain, she'll actually be blessed in various areas. But she also has to bring a carbon. And that carbon is also from grain. But her carbon is from barley, just like Sfira Saima. So what does the Gemara say? Why is her carbon different? All carbonas of grain is wheat. And the Gemara says, Kishem Shemaseho Maisa Behema, just like the way she conducted herself was animalistic, so her carbon should also be animalistic. The only problem is, you might ask, wait a second, we can't, how do you know for sure that it was animalistic? Maybe she didn't commit a sin. What's the answer? If she committed a sin, it's understood. But every woman has to bring the carbon, even if she didn't commit the sin, even if the water proves her to be innocent.
It was animalistic, like to still be in a private place with him, and
right, because even though they didn't commit a sin, but her conduct is anyway immodest. There's a man that she has some sort of a relationship with, which is not appropriate. Then they go in a private place by themselves, which is not appropriate. So even if she didn't commit the sin, it's still Maisa Behema. So therefore, by the way, there's a custom in Chabad specifically that there's a Gemara called Saita, a whole tractate on Saita, and that's Gemara has 49 pages. So the custom is that the 49 days between Pesach and Shavuos, we study Masechta Saita. Every day, 1 page. And by the time Shavuos comes, we finish the whole Masechta. So, of course, there's more to it, but this is one of the things that equate or show we can draw a parallel between Saita and the counting of the Omer. These are the only two things that when you bring the carbon of grain, it's barley and not wheat. So that's what you have number 2 and number 3. Sa'irim is the Hebrew word for barley. Michael Behema, that's food for an animal. Chitim, again, it doesn't mean that humans don't eat barley, but it just means it's mainly food for animals. And chitim, which is wheat, is mainly Michael Adam. Number 4 are the 7 midas. Number 5 is midas of the Nefesh Bahamas. Number 6 and number 7 and number 8 and number 9 and number 10 and number 11. I'm going to skip because I'm going to go back to explain it. It's one thing which we didn't explain, and I'm going to use other Mamar to explain what that means, how it's related to the Mamar. And number 12 is Saita, which I just mentioned. Number 13 is the Pasuk in Chumash, Kisista Ishtay. In fact, the Gemara says that the word Saita and Kisista Ishtay, even though one is spelled with a Samach, one is spelled with a Shin, a Sin, it's the same root word. It comes from the word Shtus, that she acted in that's in the Maimer of Basilagani, Ruach Shtus. So basically, which Shtus is the spirit of Nefesh Bahamas. And because it's about elevating and refining her Nefesh Bahamas, therefore it's also barley. Okay. So now, what is this? All these things that we skipped. So let's turn to. First, let me ask a question. In the Maimer, it doesn't ask this question, but in many Maimarim that talk about Tzvira Seimer, they ask this question. Almost all of them do. And that is the pasuk of Tzvira Seimer. Remember, we said the pasuk, which is here in this paper, and it's on page what? And not only that, but we say it every night. When we do counting the Omer and we say the thing in the Siddur, we actually say the pasuk. The pasuk reads, Tisperu Chamishim Yom. You will count 50 days. And if you look at the words in the Chumash, I would think that we have to count 50 days. But that's Torah Shebeksav, and the Torah Shebapeh, the oral Torah teaches us that we don't count 50 days, it's only 49 days. But the question is, so why does the Torah say 50? Then we need something that should teach us that it's not 50, but 49. Couldn't Torah L'Chatchila say count 49 days? So this is the way it's explained in Chassidus. Number 7, it says Chamishim Sharei Bina. There are 50 gates of Bina, of wisdom, which basically are 50 levels of holiness, but specifically related to Bina. And these 50 gates of Bina is what we're drawing down during Omer. In other words, the first night we draw down one gate. Gate means we open a gate and the light from that level is drawn down. The second night, the second gate. And the last night is the 50th gate. So if we understand the word Usefartem, like the word Sphira, it's not just counting, it means drawing down the lights. So the actual counting is only 49 days. But drawing down the light from Bina, we draw down all 50, but the 50th is on the 50th day. We don't count. That sort of happens by itself. Why don't we count it? Why do we say today is the 50th day to the Omer? So the answer is the 50th gate that we're talking about. When we count, the counting is not just for us to, know the accounting, but the counting and making the bracha is actually drawing down that light. As we know, what does the word baruch mean? It means to draw down. So when we say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam and say Sphira, we're drawing it down. In fact, if you look at the translation of what you say every night, we don't have it here, right? But we say every night, we say that there's light coming down, and that light goes to all the world. I don't know if you realize what you're saying. That I'm saying these words, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, and what's happening is it's drawing down light, b'chol ha'olamus, all the worlds. Which light is it? It's from one of the gates of the Chamishim. And every day when it counts, today is 30, that means we draw down the 30th gate from Chamishim Shari Bina. So on the 50th night, the 50th gate comes down. The only difference is that the 49, we make it come down by counting. The 50th comes by itself. So is there any so are we counting it or we're not counting it? So the answer is, even though it comes by itself, but it's a result of our counting the 49. In other words, when could the 50th gate shine by itself? Only after I finish counting 49. To use an example, there's certain things that are so sort of abstract, I can't hold on to it. So let's say the sun. Could I bring sunlight into my house? I can't use a shovel. I can't use a magnet. I can't use a lasso to get the sunlight into my house. How do I get sunlight? You can't, it just shines on its own. You can't bring it in. So someone would say, no, it's not true. You could. If there's shutters and I open the shutters, I brought the sunlight in. But the question is, did I bring it in or does it shine by itself? But I did something. I made it happen. The answer is, I made it happen, but by bringing it in. What I did was remove any kind of obstruction. That's removed. Now that the obstruction is removed, now the sun could shine by itself. So basically, this light on the 50th is like infinite. Infinite we have no access to. We can't make a bracha to draw it down. It's not accessible to us. But after counting 49, and we bring down the 49 gates, after that point, we've sort of created a space now that's such a holy space, and now that light comes shining by itself. So on one hand, we're counting 49, but on the other hand, we're drawing down all 50 lights that are negaya to preparing us for Matan Torah. To be more specific, I'm going to give out the sheet, and that's related to number 8. Shira, if you don't mind, I can trouble you. Hope you'll forgive me. Oh. This is chapter 31 in Tanya. The Alter Rebbe talks about the idea of a skafia, where a person has to discipline his Yetzer Hara. And then let's look at the top of the page 426. What we just explained about the Nefesh Elokis breaking away from the restrictions and confinement of the Nefesh Bahamis is, in a sense, Yetzias Mitzrayim. Shenemar, in reference to Yetzias Mitzrayim, it says Ki Barach Ha'om, and the people escaped. I guess the word baruch literally probably means more like ran away, but that's escaped, I guess. In other words, it wasn't done by Mitzrayim opening the door and saying, go ahead, but they ran out of Mitzrayim in haste. In fact, that's why we eat matzah, to indicate that we went out of Mitzrayim, we went out in haste. Talmud, Alter Rebbe says, this is something which is really shocking. Why did it have to be that they ran away? I mean, the reason why we say they ran away, because they told Paro they're going to be there only for 3 days. Remember, all along they said, Moshe said, just give us 3 days to pray. And then, that's it, they never came back. So, that means that they ran away. Why couldn't he tell Paro openly, we're here to leave forever? And Paro would have surely let them go, because he didn't want them anymore. He wouldn't have to send them. Could have been the same miracle. Come to Paro, so we have to serve Hashem and let us go free forever. And being that he had so many plagues and he was already at his wit's end, he would say, okay, go. Ella, the answer is because it's not just a story there we see it on the surface. What was going on spiritually? Spiritually, Paro is Klippa. Going out of Mitzrayim means defeating Klippa and becoming free. By the Yidden, the Ra, the negative energy of Klippa was still there. Not just there, it was still strong, just like before, in the left side of the heart. It says that their impure Klippa that they had in them did not stop until Matan Torah. That's when it was gone. But when they went out of Mitzrayim, they still had all the impurity in them. They wanted, even though it's there, but still they wanted to leave Mitzrayim, which means to disconnect from the Golus, from being in exile and under the control of Sitracha to Mitzrayim, and to attach itself to Hashem. As it says, Hashem Uzi Uzi Umanusi B'Yem Tzara. God is my strength, God is my fortress, and is my refuge in the day of affliction. In other words, that's where I run away to. So he wanted to run away from Mitzrayim and run towards Hashem. Mizgabi Umanusi Umanishli. He's my tower and my refuge and my escape. So we see the term escape and the term refuge. That's what happened in Mitzrayim. We were still Tameh, but I wanted to run away from Mitzrayim and become free. I mean, just to compare, but yesterday there was another Jewish kid who was released from there, a hostage who went home, actually connected to the Lubavitch community in Tenafly in New Jersey. So what?
Because Trump say to
Oh, Trump. No,
Yeah.
Hashem.
Hashem.
Yeah. I know Trump thinks he's Hashem, but it was Hashem.
Okay.
So he went out of hostage, right? But whatever he went through, Rahman al-Islam, no human being should ever go through that. It's still in him. This person's gonna need a lot of time to get rid of all what's inside, emotionally, mentally, as a result of all the suffering that he went through, all the trauma that he went through. That means in Ruchnis would mean that they still have the tomb of Mitzrayim in them, but at least we're out of that place, and now we're running towards Hashem. And that's why in the future, when Mashiach will come, when Hashem will remove the Ruach HaTumah, there won't be any klipa at all. There won't be any klipa altogether. It says, you won't have to run out of Golus. You'll be able to go out of Golus in a peaceful way, in a calm way. When you hear that you're going out of Golus, who cares that I'm running or I'm walking? I'm out of there. So obviously the running or the walking indicates a different kind of redemption. Basically, the difference is, we learned about this when we were going over Pesach, up in Chassidus, that when you run away from an enemy, that means there's still something to be afraid of. I defeated the enemy, but there's still something to be afraid of because the enemy is still there and is still a risk, still a threat. If I destroy the enemy completely, that he's non-existent, I don't have to run anymore because there's nothing to be afraid of. I don't have to be afraid that he'll get up and chase after me or he'll do something else. He doesn't exist. It's gone. It's over. So basically, this is a very fundamental point that's brought down in all my Maimorim that deal with Pesach, all the Maimorim that deal with Shvira Seimer, and that is that when Yidden went out of Mitzrayim, the Nefesh of Hamas really wasn't yet changed. Hashem revealed himself in a way like he never revealed himself before, and he never revealed himself after, maybe by Matan Torah and when Mashiach will come. But the way Hashem revealed himself, by Kriyas Yamsuf, by the 10 plagues, this was such a his galus, Hashem's light was so revealed, but not because the Nefesh of Hamas was refined, it was because Hashem revealed himself from his end. But from our end, our Nefesh of Hamas was still a Nefesh of Hamas, and the Klipa in us was still there. So therefore, Chassidus explains that, in a sense, the Nefesh of Hamas was, of course, on a high, but not because of it's something in its own right. It's only because of Nefesh Elokis. The mashal I always give you is with a piece of paper flying in the wind. You'll never forget that one. Piece of paper flying in the wind, even if it flies on top of the Empire State Building, it's still a dead piece of paper. In a sense, the paper has not changed. The paper is not anything different than it was before. It's the wind that's flying, but because the paper is on the wind, so the wind carries the paper. So the Nefesh Elokis carries the Nefesh Bahamas. So of course they were completely, totally uplifted and inspired and running to Hashem, but it was mainly because of the Nefesh Elokis. The Nefesh Bahamas itself in its own right hasn't been changed. It can't without the work. So that means that the one who was mainly affected was the Nefesh Elokis. So now we have to receive the Torah. How can we do that? So for this reason, we have now 7 weeks. That now the main Aveda is, let's get our Nefesh Bahamas transformed and get Nefesh Bahamas ready to receive the Torah. So that's why what we're saying is what happened on Pesach in the language of Chassidus is called Isrusa de Le'ela, number 10. Isrusa de Le'ela means an awakening from above that comes without Isrusa de Latata. Without, in other words, Nefesh Bahamas didn't do anything to be worthy of this godly light that was shining. I didn't do any work of self-refinement. But nevertheless, because of Nefesh Elokis is elevated, the Nefesh Bahamas also gets elevated. The 7 weeks, that's when we start working on ourselves, on the Nefesh Bahamas itself, and changing it and transforming it into a way that the Nefesh Bahamas, from its perspective, starts loving Hashem and fearing Hashem and doing what Hashem wants. So when we go to receive the Torah, both are going together, the Nefesh Elokis and the Nefesh Bahamas. Any questions? You follow what I'm saying? There's a beautiful explanation of Chassidus on a pasuk in Shir Shirim. It's also here in the booklet, and we'll go into this tomorrow. What does it mean? Where the Shir Shirim talks about three different things, three different stages, and now Chassidus explain. One is Pesach, one is counting the Omer, then the Shavuos. We'll learn more and understand how counting the Omer is a bridge that connects Pesach to Shavuos. In fact, you know that Shavuos is the only yontif that has no date. Which means even though today, if you look on the calendar, it'll always tell you that the 6th day of Sivan is Shavuos. But in essence, which means from the Torah, there's no date for Shavuos. In fact, in the olden days, when they used to do the Kiddush L'Chodesh in the moon, not by a calendar, but by seeing the moon, sometimes Shavuos was one day, sometimes it was a different day. It wasn't always the same day of the month. So how did they establish this yontif? The yontif was established by 50 days from Pesach, which means that it wasn't about the day in the month. It was about when the 50th day of Pesach comes, then we're ready for Shavuos. After we finish refining these 50 gates of Bina, 50 aspects of the Nefesh Bahamis, and so on. Okay, to be continued. Maybe so tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, women. Very much.
Meaning, like, they're fine to walk in, but they're flat, they have room to support. If you wear them a lot, my feet are gonna kill me, but the shoes themselves don't hurt. That makes sense. Yeah.